Welcome to another episode of Ex-Vicarious. I'm Braith, and today I'm joined by Stephen Turban. I first came across Stephen when he made an awesome post about permission, specifically how way too many people need permission to do the things they dream of, whether it's traveling across the world or starting a business. They say, if only I won the lottery, if only I got into this program, if only I got this funding. But Stephen's never been someone to ask or wait for permission. His high school didn't have a volunteer program for at-risk youth, so he founded one and they were recognized as Youth Volunteers of the Year in 2013. His university, Harvard by the way, didn't have junto groups, so he co-founded one and called it the Franklin Fellowship after Benjamin Franklin, and they've now held over 400 dinners. He also became an internet celebrity in China, worked at McKinsey, and co-authored an Amazon #1 bestseller book. And now he's building two bootstrapped companies, Lumiere Education, which helps students publish research papers, and Leverage Assistants, which helps founders hire the best personal assistants and train them to delegate efficiently. No accelerator, no VC money, just a sharp focus on being profitable. On the side, he's also a stand-up comedian in Vietnam, and I can confirm he's the #1 white guy cracking jokes in fluent Vietnamese. So, Stephen, man, anything I missed before we dive into the questions?
Yeah, number one and only one. So I think it's a pretty limited, easy to hit the top when you're the only one. But no, thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, it's a very, very special, unique niche for sure, which we'll dig into a bit later on. By the way, if you're new here, let me quickly tell you why I even do this podcast. In one sentence, it's because I believe life is wasted if you're not doing everything you can to make your wildest dreams come true. This often means going against the crowd, taking unconventional career paths, and building the mindset that makes you a millionaire, Olympian, red carpet actor, or even the queen of a food empire. Those are the exact people I interview so that you can learn from them and turn your own wildest dreams into reality. If you're a regular listener of Ex-Vicarious, it'll help me a ton if you like, subscribe, or share this round. So thanks for being here. Let's get back to this week's guest. Let's start with Harvard. So did you always know you wanted to study there, and how did you get it?
No, to be honest, it wasn't on my radar at all. I wasn't actually a very good student up until the 10th grade. I always liked reading, but I did pretty bad. I think in my Spanish class, my 8th grade, I got a C and I got sent out of the class 64 times over the course of the year, which is I think every other class I got kicked out of the class. I was just not a good student. I know that because I etched actually on the side of the wall a mark each time I got kicked out. So you can maybe see that if you go back to my school. But then in the 10th grade, something shifted. Maybe it was just I had this amazing set of teachers. It could have just been like puberty, who knows? Where I started thinking, man, I really want to be surrounded by really talented people and try to get to the best university possible. And I just got really intense over the next 3 years. Actually took a year off of high school to go study Chinese in Taipei. I went to public school there. And that was in part because I was really interested in that. Also because I wanted to do something that was I felt like, oh, I need to do something kind of weird to show off that I'm not just this terrible student in the 9th and 10th grade, but actually that I'm somewhat strong. And so that's why I was this hilarious 19, almost 20-year-old high school student in the US, which is not a good look, by the way. But that was, yeah. And then Harvard was amazing. I'm so lucky to get in. It was just a great experience, and it's a big community for me now, but it certainly wasn't something that I was grinding on my whole life. Definitely.
Yeah, so you mentioned moving to Taipei. What would you say were the biggest personal changes for you during that trip and after you came back?
Yeah, so moving to Taipei, I do think this is a bit around that permission comment we talked about, which is just the idea that in life, permission is extremely cheap to give yourself and often very expensive to take from others. And strategy, I was just listening to this podcast on strategy, and I think strategy is often making the move that isn't even on the chessboard. And so for me, sorry to not directly answer your question, but for me, part of going to Taiwan was I was man, I don't think I'm strong enough as just a normal high school student. I grew up in Missouri in the US. So I felt what could I do that's just totally different? And then I saw that there was this exchange program to Taipei, and I decided to take a year off of high school instead of finishing high school there. and then coming back to be like the super senior. And it was an amazing experience. I went to this all boys public school. I went to school in Chinese. I mean, it was really challenging in a lot of ways, but I learned Chinese. I learned how to hustle like only like a Taiwanese high school student can, or I'm sure a Chinese or Korean high school student can as well. And I just got benchmarked to a different group. And so when I came back, I was just using that like Taiwanese, kind of like Asian kid mindset, just grinding in my high school, and I was crushing everyone, and it was awesome. So that was an amazing experience for me, but definitely some difficult parts.
Yeah, I know you said you came back with that grind mindset, but in general, when you've been living in different countries, immersing fully into their culture, how has it influenced your perspective on relationships and also communication?
Well, I think for me, there are two main things that I feel like I've taken away. And I really love language learning. I learned Chinese in high school, learned Spanish before then. Now I'm like really deep in Vietnamese. The two big takeaways I've always had is that one is that people are pretty much the same no matter what. And so
Right.
there are certainly cultural differences across like what's funny or what's interesting, but the fundamentals of like being interested in someone else, caring, being humorous, like not taking yourself too seriously, being other oriented, those like kind of like hold no matter what. But the second thing I took away was that people are really open to sharing about things that are important to their identity. And the great thing about language learning is that you're kind of an idiot. I mean, I'm always an idiot when I'm learning a language. And so you're always trying to ask questions. You're like, hey man, like what is it? How do I say this thing? Or like, if I
Mm.
say it like this, is this like super rude or is this insulting? Or like, hey, tell me more about like this, like, tradition. And I found the capacity of people to be able to share about themselves is, really deep. But then also that means that it's a communication tactic is like you as an outsider, if you can orient to the other person, that's a great way for you to build a relationship with them and also to learn about them. And so that for me, I feel like I always took that away, like even in conversations with like someone who's American or, if it's oriented around this other person and they're willing to share about something they're excited by, then you usually, they enjoy it more, usually get more out of it in terms of your own learning. So I feel like I really took that
Mm.
away from language learning.
Yeah, that's really awesome. You mentioned how sometimes what people find funny in different culture is a little bit different, and those are some nuances that maybe take a little bit more time to understand. So
Sure.
the fact that you are in a comedy group, actually, could you introduce the audience a little bit to your comedy group first of all,
Yeah.
and just like how you got in, how you got in to the group? Yeah.
Yeah, so I recently joined a group called Saigon Teu, which is the number one stand-up comedy group, and to be fair, probably the only one, but really the number one stand-up comedy group in Vietnam. They're pretty big in the
Yeah.
country. They have like over a million, I think 5 million followers across different socials, and they're professionals, like they're really good. I went to one of their shows, and I was just like, oh my god, if I could, and I've never done comedy before, just to be clear. I was like, if I could do that, if I could be on stage with them or just try to do it, then that would be my Vietnamese. I'd hit like another level. And so then
Right.
for a
Yeah.
year, I was I think the word simp is like the best way to describe myself. I would just like show up to their meetings. I met their founder randomly and I was like, hey, can I come to your meetings? I would just show
Yeah.
up every week for a year. They never invited me. I always invited myself. And
Right.
then finally the founder was like, hey, I heard, like, he's like, hey, are you interested in like doing stand-up comedy? And I was like, dude, I've just been like coming to your meetings for a year. Of course I'm interested. And so finally they gave me some slots with like the professional group to try out. And I got in luckily. And then
Yeah.
I've been performing for the past year. And, when you're a white guy doing stand comedy in Vietnamese, like you are the joke, so it is like, it's like so funny. And
Yeah.
it's, I'm not a great comedian, but like these clips have gone super viral. Like one clip has like almost 20 million views on TikTok,
Yeah.
but not because it's funny, but because it's just like this white dude being like, like CGI or whatever. It's so funny. So that's called my strategic positioning.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, I can see how there's multiple layers of things for people to laugh at, I guess, like, the comedy itself and then just the shock of it as well, as you
totally,
mentioned.
100%.
Um, what sort of meetings was it that you went to? Because you mentioned like going to those meetings. Was it just performances or
Oh
was it something else?
So funny, these meetings. So these are like writing sessions by the group. It's like the top, think of like the top 8 comedians in Vietnam all
Right.
meet and they do like a writing session together. So I met the founder. I said, hey, could I like participate? He's like, oh, why don't you come to one of our writing meetings? So I
Yeah.
showed up, I had some of my jokes, and I shared some of my jokes that gave me some feedback. The funny thing about this meeting is I would go every week for a year, right? 52 times.
Yeah.
They had a group chat where they would share the scripts to each other. So the meeting would be like, "Hey everybody, okay, look at the group chat. I just shared my script." And then I was the only person in the room not in the group chat.
Yeah.
And so every time I'd be
Right.
like, "Hey dude, can you like pass like direct message me the script that's sent in this group chat that I'm like total loser in this group." So,
Oh.
but I do think a lot of life is just showing up. So I really just showed up
Mm.
for a year, and then mere exposure effect. They got used to me, and they allowed me to join them, which is really what
Yeah.
happened.
Well, I mean, 100% worth it. Like showing up 52 times, and now you're part of them. And I mean, I watched some of your videos on YouTube. Actually, I didn't
Oh, fun.
understand anything, but I still enjoyed it. I
Awesome. I
still
love
enjoyed it.
that. Cool.
And then I actually came across you on some game shows as well. Or correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
One looked like it was
Yeah.
about food, and one looked like it was some sort of dating show. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, could you just tell me a little bit more about what was happening there?
Yeah. So for me, I'm like really experience oriented. So anything that's a new experience, I'll almost always do it. Like
Yeah.
tomorrow, I'm filming my first TV commercial. It's so embarrassing.
Well,
It's for Nissin. It's a
yeah. Okay.
like a cup ramen company, and then I'm doing
Yeah.
this like really like silly dance, and I'm wearing like an American shirt. It's like so
Yeah.
dumb. So I have like no shame. B, I really like experiences, so I'm always down. And then C, I do think like one thing that I did was that learning Vietnamese. I'm really into languages. I went really hard to Vietnamese. There's just not that many foreigners who are really dedicated to learning the language. And
Yeah.
so if you're looking for a white guy who speaks Vietnamese, I'm probably like the dude you think about in Vietnam
Yeah.
now. I mean, there's not that many. It's not like there's like some competitive set that I'm in, but I have no shame. That's the key. I think I did this dating show that was I did not win. Everyone thought I was gay. It was just bad.
That's crazy.
It was just bad. I'm not saying do what I do. I'm just saying
Yeah.
that's how it ended up.
Well, I mean, if that's what they thought, maybe that opened you up to other experiences, other shows afterwards, maybe. So everything just leads on to the next thing. But yeah, no, Nissan is awesome. I know not too many people. Like, of course, all my Asian mates, they all know Nissan.
Right.
Like in Cantonese, we just call it Gong Jai Min because it looks like
Okay.
a toy. So it looks like a doll, right? So it's basically like doll noodles
Interesting.
for like I don't know, maybe Vietnam they have some different versions, but yeah, in Hong
Yeah.
Kong, like that's what we generally refer to it. So I think that's awesome.
Cool.
Taking a bit of right turn now. So I know that you did a flash mob with 700 students across the world raising awareness for malaria. So I wanted to ask, how did that come about? How did you organize everything? What made you focus on malaria?
Yeah, so I do think a big theme in my life is, now I'm doing these startups, and I spend like 90% of my time working on these startups. And I don't think I realized when I was starting, but looking back, my whole life has just been a series of me like seeing opportunities and wanting to start them, and then like pushing them into some level of reality, and just getting really interested in that. So what happened freshman year was that there was this contest at Harvard, which was really cool, which was saying, hey, like figure out the best way to promote awareness of malaria. And I got really into flash mobs in high school. And so I proposed an idea with a friend of mine, this amazing woman, Lily, and we said, hey, why don't we do a flash mob oriented around malaria? And so, yeah, we ended up doing that. We did this flash mob in the US, in China, and in Zimbabwe. It happened all on the same day on World
Yeah.
Malaria Day. And I would say that had to be one of the least effective ways on earth to get awareness of malaria.
Right.
There's in retrospect, it's like such a dumb idea. I don't know why I was so into it, but for a year, I was like, all my efforts were focused on creating this flash mob for malaria awareness. It's like we should have just donated the money to like bed nets. Like I don't know,
Right.
but in any case, that was what we did. So it was a really cool experience, and it was just a bunch of hustle. I mean, to me, it's like actually it was a really good like. I think a lot about like building entrepreneurial dojos for yourself. Like, how do you create the reps? For me, it was a great rep of
Yeah.
getting something from 0 to 1, convincing people this was like a decent idea, which it wasn't in retrospect, and then getting other people involved. So we had these like connections in China and in Zimbabwe who are also helping to run the flash mob as well. So yeah, it was really fun. It was really good,
Yeah.
really good experience.
Yeah. Well, let's say you have a bunch of free time now, hypothetically, and you could
Yeah.
do a flash mob for whatever you want, and it can be as worldwide as possible. What would you
Yeah.
do a flash mob for today?
Well, I think that flash mob's a terrible way to gain awareness of something. So I would probably do a flash mob to embarrass a friend. Uh,
Right. Yeah.
like I would make it like I would pick a friend who hates attention the most, and then
Yeah.
make like hundreds of people like dance at them or something. Like, that would be probably what I would do. Yeah.
That friend's got to watch out. You never
Totally.
know. The other thing I wanted to just ask on, like you said how obviously the flash mob, even though the effectiveness wasn't high, but it just got those reps in
Yeah.
for, eventually becoming a founder. Now you're a founder of two bootstrap companies.
Yeah.
Um, so a lot of listeners are ambitious students or founders. So how can
Mm.
Lumiere Education or Leverage Assistance help either of them?
So yeah, just quickly describe these two companies. So Lumiere is a research program for really ambitious high school students. So here's the pain point for really nerdy high school students who want to study at top universities like Harvard. What they do historically to try to get in is they get really good test scores and they like get perfect grades. And to be honest, there's just like tens of thousands of students who are like that. So they have
Yeah.
to figure out ways to distinguish themselves. One way to do that is to do research. It's hard to do research, so we help pair you with a researcher to do that. That's like pretty much it. I started when I was a PhD student back at HBS, and so that's kind of the context. And then Leverage
Yeah.
is pretty different. Leverage is essentially a company where we help you founders work with an assistant, usually a really well trained, talented assistant who's relatively inexpensive because they're based in places like the Philippines or South Africa. So, and that model came about because I had hired an amazing assistant, Shannon, for Lumiere, which is like about 80 people full time right now. And she
Yeah.
was just a huge unlock for me. And so I thought, man, maybe there's an opportunity there to spin this out into something that helps out other people as well. And now we work with dozens of entrepreneurs to do that. And so if you're an entrepreneur and you're like, I think the skills of entrepreneurship is how do you leverage yourself? That's the name. How do you abstract yourself away continuously? I think having an
Yeah.
assistant is one great way to do that. There are certainly other ways. And we help founders figure out how to get a great assistant and how to use them, which a lot of founders just don't know, frankly, how to work with an assistant. So we help founders do that. So that's essentially the
Yeah,
leverage company.
yeah, it's awesome. I wanted to ask, how do you balance your time between running both these companies?
Yeah, so I probably spend. I think my strength is in the 0 to 1 stage for companies, and then building systems for them to get to 5. So I think leverage is starting to transition out of the one. So for the
Right,
past year, it's been maybe like 70% leverage. Now it's probably going to go down to 40 or 30% is my guess,
right.
as we're kind of building
Okay.
out a team to lead it. Yeah.
Yeah, and in terms of your own personal brand, I know that on LinkedIn, obviously, I've seen a lot of your posts, which I always
Mm.
resonate a lot with. I love the things that you bring light to, and a lot of the time, it goes back to showing how powerful having leverage is. So I can see how a lot of the time you mentioned how with Lumiere you had that own your own personal assistant, and that's how
Yeah.
the idea for the company actually came about for your next company. So when it comes to putting out content, what do you think about when you're trying to balance different things that you're working on? Is there a certain schedule where, like, I want to focus just on shedding light on what I'm doing with this company and not that one?
Mm.
Is there a certain process to it, or is it quite natural with whatever you're experiencing yourself at a given time?
Yeah, for me, I'm trying to write for other founders or aspiring founders. That's kind of the group. And then I'm trying to just share about the thing I'm most expert on, which is my own life.
Yeah,
And hopefully, I've always felt that the most powerful thing that can happen to you in life is for you to look at someone who's doing something that you're not doing, and then for you to think that
right.
they're kind of an idiot. Like it has to be those two things in combination. I think like you look at someone, you're like, oh, this guy's crushing it, and
Mm,
then you think at the same time, you're like, oh, they're kind of a dummy. Like they're kind of like a knucklehead. Like not that they're like not a good person, they're probably crushing it, but you like,
mm,
oh, this person's not better than me. And I think most people look at me and they're like, this guy's kind of an idiot, right? Just baseline, which is totally great. I don't want that. But then hopefully maybe I'm doing stuff that people might think like, oh, that's interesting. I could do that. So that's like kind of my hope is that by just sharing a bit about my journey, that for people can get a benchmark a little bit for themselves. And then some tactical stuff I think is interesting, like how you use an assistant, how you hire teams, how you think about hiring globally. Those things are things I think we're good at and can share on. So yeah, that's essentially how I think about it. Just share my own experiences to founders or people who are thinking about founding companies.
Yeah, and going down that path a bit further, you share a lot about being bootstrapped and how much you believe in being a bootstrap founder, even when, founders who get all these raises, they get all these like spotlight, all these
Right.
news articles and all that. But you show all these benefits of being a bootstrap founder that a lot of people don't see because they don't look into
Yeah.
like all the possibilities, right? So I
Yeah.
wanted to ask about, did you always know that you wanted to be a bootstrap founder? And what are certain things about being bootstrapped that most people don't know that you would want to tell them?
Yeah, so definitely not. Like I did not know that I wanted to be a bootstrap founder. I tend to kind of bristle from like the mainstream. So I think because a lot of my friends are raising venture capital and like that's not necessarily a good strategy by the way, but like that's just who I am. I was like, oh,
Mm.
maybe I don't want to raise venture capital because that's just, you know, what everyone else is doing. I think maybe I could do something else. But
Yeah.
then I was really lucky and I discovered like, oh my God, if you create a bootstrap company, it is amazing in terms of what it can do
Mm.
for you. Um, there's like three things I think that are just incredible about being a bootstrap founder. So the first, I think the most powerful is that if you are bootstrapping a company that works, you are truly in charge of your life and in charge of the company. So for me, like the example is like, I run this company, it's super fun. And I'm like, I want to be a stand-up comedian in Vietnamese. Like that's a terrible decision for a founder to make, right? Like how that does that relate to study abroad at all? Like it does not. So it's
Yeah.
completely irrelevant, but it doesn't matter because I get to do whatever gives me energy. And for me, I'm like, this is something I
Mm.
want to do in my life. If I was venture backed, maybe I could do it, but I would have to like look at my VC and they'd be like, dude, why are you doing this? Like it'd be awkward. So to me, that's
Yeah.
a huge one. I think companies are about creating freedom. And if you're raising a bunch of money, you're actually oftentimes boxing yourself in a prison of your own design. So that's a
Yeah.
little scary for me. The second thing about being bootstrapped is that it really forces good fundamentals. So you think a lot more about margin, you think a lot more about like how much you're paying someone. You're not like eating a bunch of sweets and growing and then realizing, oh, I have like a big stomach ache. That doesn't happen. Like one of our competitors for Lumiere recently like fired half their team. There were 40 people, they fired
Right.
20 people. I would never want to do that. I mean, and they're good founders, but they just raised a bunch of money, couldn't quite use all the people, and they had way too much
Mm.
cost. They had to fire all these people. Like, I never want to be in a position where I hire someone and then I have to fire them because I took money that I didn't necessarily need.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and then just the third thing on being bootstrapped is that it that people don't think about a lot is that if you're the founder and let's say you're trying to optimize for making money, which is not necessarily what everyone's optimizing for, but if that is what you're optimizing for, then as a bootstrap founder, you're often in a better position in terms of a like median outcome or even like an expected value outcome. You may not have like the massive wins of like, you become like you sell for a few $1 billion, but because you own the whole company, you can always sell it and you don't have these cliffs of where, if you raise $20 million, usually you need to sell for more than $20 million for you to then get any return on it.
Yeah.
And then even then, it may be even like in a pretty small amount. So many of my friends who raised a bunch of money have gone out of business because even though the business itself was good, they couldn't get big enough to then sell it for a point where they would make any money. So they said they just gave up. And that's, I think a bummer.
Yeah. Have any of those mates actually wanted to try again with the bootstrap method now?
So many. Oh my God, it's
Yeah.
so funny. Like I would say I have at least 3 or 4 friends who raised venture, didn't work. Now they're like, oh, bootstrap train all the way.
Right.
The flip side, I don't know
Yeah.
the flip. I don't know many bootstrap founders who are like, oh, I cannot wait to go raise venture capital. I haven't seen that. But of course, like not every business can be bootstrapped. If you have like a huge upfront tech cost, or if you have like, you're some biotech company where you're
Yeah.
like you're not going to get returns for a decade, it makes sense. Like not all companies can do that, but a lot of
Yeah.
companies can. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, 100%. Like it does matter, I guess, what your overall goal is with it. That helps you decide
Right.
which way to go. But
Right.
yeah, it's really interesting insight. The other thing I wanted to ask about is I noticed that you're in Sam Parr's private network, Hampton. So what's an obscure learning you've had from being in an exclusive community like that?
There are so many rich people in the world. is kind of what what I found. But also, to be honest, that's not the that's true as well, actually. Which also is interesting because it makes you feel like even if you achieve some success, everyone can feel like a loser because you're surrounded then by people who are like who are then you. One big thing for me on this community I thought was really interesting is I looked around and my friend group has like all these like fancy brands. Like people are like, oh, they worked at Google, they went to Harvard, blah blah blah. And I looked at this entrepreneur community, and it's like a pretty reasonable bar. You have to have like more than $1 million in revenue, and now I think it's 3 million in revenue. And then I
Yeah.
looked at people's backgrounds, and it was like people were like, I went to Wichita State, and then I, like Wichita State's great, but it's just not like a crazy prestigious place. And then like I
Mm.
just want to start a business, and now they're crushing it. And I just felt like,
Yeah.
oh wow, like I mean, it's great to have these prestige markers, which certainly signal something for you, but most founders don't have it and they're crushing it, and that's totally fine. So that was actually quite useful for me to observe.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So, would you say most of those founders who didn't really have any of this prestigious markers, did they go into founding a company like right after uni, or did most of them do some other work beforehand?
Yeah, it was a mix. I think it's a mix. Some of them just went off and then
Yeah,
built. I think most of them had a couple jobs, like one or two jobs. I think the average age in the group is like late 30s, early 40s.
yeah,
So I think a lot of them, and then these are companies that are like internet first um, businesses. About half are bootstrapped. So uh,
right, okay,
and it might be they're bootstrapped because they couldn't raise money. Like it might be harder, with their background to raise money. So I think, but my guess is, yeah. But I was interested. Like you have all these founders who are crushing it, and they're not like their background is not like a checklist of like what you would expect,
yeah,
which was cool for me to see.
yeah. No, really cool for me as well, just to know that, like, I guess what I try to share with this podcast is, all these unconventional paths that people can take when you have an
Right.
unconventional dream. There
Mm,
is no one way to go about it. It's not like if you didn't get into this, you can't do that, or you didn't do this, so you can't do that. There's always
right.
different ways for you to figure things out that works for you, like uniquely works for you, that may
Right.
not work for someone else. But the thing is, there is always a solution. So I think yeah, that's really good insight. Going back to your love for learning languages, can you take me back to the very first time you ever spoke Chinese or Vietnamese to a local, and what that experience was like?
Yeah, so one of the amazing things about language learning is you get the best, especially languages like Chinese and Vietnamese, you get the best feedback cycle on earth. Especially if you look like, you grew up in a cave in like in Ireland, like I do. So I remember, so I learned Chinese when I was in high school and I moved to Taiwan. And I remember just talking to people, and just an example of this is my first few months I was learning Chinese. I remember going to go buy some stinky tofu, and the lady selling the stinky tofu, it was me, this like high school girl selling stinky tofu, and then I went there, and the I don't know who was more excited to talk to me, like the ai, like the auntie, or the high school girl. She got really sweaty and kind of like fled, so clearly not her. But the auntie was like super stoked, and people are just so happy when someone who's not from their culture learns about their
Yeah.
culture. I find in general, and which is amazing. So when I learn the language, I get all this incredible feedback of like, I learned something. People are like, "Oh my god, that's so awesome! I love that you're learning." And I've just never experienced anything in life that's like that. Like, I don't know. I mean, it's maybe being a creator has some of those elements. Like if you do it and you succeed, like you get that feedback. But in a creator, you can also get negative feedback. But for languages, people are always stoked, I find. So,
Yeah. Yeah, no, I do see that. I have seen, like, on those videos, anytime someone speaks a language, it looks like they wouldn't know how to speak normally. People are always pleasantly surprised no matter how good you are, because it
right.
shows just an effort to learn a different language
Right.
and shows that you care about other people's culture. So, yeah, no, I think it's really awesome. Also, just that whole mindset of not caring about permission that you've had throughout your life, when did that actually
Mm.
start? And what was the very first moment that you felt that mindset take control of your actions?
So let me describe it a little differently, or just to say how
Mm,
I think I got there. I have always felt like I will never get through the front door. Whether or not that's true, I've always felt like if I compete with other people, I'm going to get crushed. I'm
right.
not smart enough. I'm not like whatever, tall enough, good looking enough, like whatever, like I'm not as like charismatic enough. I always feel, and this could just be wrong, but like I always feel like if I'm going to go through the front door, I'm going to get crushed. And so I've never wanted to go through the front door. And I think at every point in my life, I've always tried to figure out what's like a side door for me to get something that I want. Like for Harvard, it was me saying like, I'm going to take 5 years to finish high school, and I'm going to go study in Taiwan for a year and grind on like the ACT until I get like a perfect score, whatever, and then come back. And so I'm going to just be different than other candidates. Or even like I worked at McKinsey after graduation. I didn't go through the recruiting process. Actually, what happened was I got introduced by my intern CEO of a startup I did. And then I wasn't like a generalist consultant. I was like a data scientist, and I switched into a generalist consultant. So I didn't go to the front door at all. In starting companies, I felt like, let me just try something, because I don't think I'm like not like technical enough to raise a bunch of money. So let me just see if I can do it like kind of my own way. So I always feel like it's kind of maybe an underdog mindset, which is just like, I don't think I could actually do these things myself. Like I don't, for example, for me, stand-up comedy, like I don't think I could be a stand-up comedian in the US. So like, how could I do something like that in a way that's like, I can definitely do it. And for me, it's like, oh, I'm going to do it like, some like pathetic white dude in Vietnam, fine, totally okay. But I'm going to do it like in Vietnamese. And so that's for me always the mindset that I have. So it doesn't come from a sense of like strength. Actually, it comes from me like actually probably like a deep insecurity of like being like, I don't think I can compete. So I really don't want to compete. And so I just try to find a way to be like a little bit sneaky, so I don't have to compete with everyone. And then I can always tell a story looking backwards to say, oh, I crushed it in school. That's why I went to Harvard. Like I did so well. That's why I worked at McKinsey. But like people don't observe that at every step, I never felt like I was like going through the front door. I always felt like I was going through like the side door. So to me, that's
Right.
the permission thing. And that if you have to go through the side door, then you can't go through the permission-based lane. That's like, hey, like apply to our job from this like form. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna get crushed. So I need to figure out a way that's like not in the current system for me to achieve that thing. So that's my mindset. For honestly most things that I do, I just think, oh, I'm gonna get crushed if I compete against other people. So I try not to compete.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So for people who may be interested in getting into like MBB, for example, and
Yeah.
feel the same way, where they don't feel like going through the front door is ever going to work
Mhm.
for them, you could like refer back to your experience if you want, but what would you suggest to them? How could they go about that?
Yeah, so like just so you want to think about it organizationally. So for these firms, first of all, a lot of people can't go through the front door. Maybe I should try. I didn't even try. Like so that's kind of a failure. I didn't even like try. So maybe try. That's one. But then think about how you can be uniquely competitive. Let's just say for McKinsey, Bain, or BCG. So there's places where it's easier to get a job than other places. So examples of this include different regions. So like let's say you want to work in Maine, McKinsey, and you're in New York, and you're like, dude, that's the hardest office to get into. Well, what if you move to Riyadh? Riyadh needs people. That sounds weird, right? Why would you move to Riyadh? But Riyadh actually really needs people, and they're hiring a ton of people. It's probably the least competitive place. They're looking for talented people. If you're in Riyadh, you know all the people at McKinsey. They're gonna be like, dude, come work with us. It's gonna be much easier for you to do that. For me, my
Yeah.
approach was like, I don't think I'm gonna become a generalist consultant. I was like, what if I try to go like the data science, machine learning route? I'm relatively technical. I could do that. And then that was way easier to get into. And then once you're in these organizations, you can always move. So if you're in Riyadh or if you're in like this analyst position, whatever, you can always switch to another place later
Mm,
on. So this is
yeah.
this is like the mindset. It's like, where's the weak point in the system that if you
Yeah.
are willing to, you can exploit. I always think about like, where's the weak point? And by the way, I don't think it's bad, because if you're showing this level of determination to get it, that's actually a pretty good indicator of success in life.
Yeah.
And so I think I've had a lot of guilt being like, oh, I don't deserve to be here. I've always done all these side doors. But later on I realized, oh, that's just like actually a strength that I have. I shouldn't be ashamed of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, and especially when you talk about these weak points and how you focus on that, like the reason why it may be a weak point is because like not many people are, as you said, based on location or the specific role in a company, maybe not
Yeah.
many people are actually going for it. So the company does have a need for people in those roles anyway. So
Right.
yeah, I think it's 100% not a bad thing, because both sides are benefiting, but it's just that
Right.
you're focusing on something where most people wouldn't focus. So no, that's super interesting. I also wanted to ask yourself personally, who's your favorite comedian? And also, if you reach the status where you could book out tours worldwide, let's say for like stand-up comedy, would
Yeah,
you
yeah,
go
yeah.
full time?
So I would definitely not go full time. No
Yeah.
way. For
Even if you're
me,
booking out
this
stadiums across the world.
yeah, yeah, no way, no way, no. First of all, there's no way I could book out stadiums around the world because it's Vietnam, and so like I would have the only way I could only go to Sydney. I could go to Houston, Texas. I could
Mm.
go, to Japan. I could maybe tour with this group, but comedy for me is a serious hobby. It's not my job, and
Mm.
it's joyful as a serious hobby. But I don't want it to be my job because I love building companies. I love Trevor Noah. I think he's hilarious. I just love his
Mm.
ability to impersonate other people. He's so insightful. And I also really like Jimmy O Yang. I find
Yeah.
I consume a lot of Asian American content. I'm obviously this white guy, but I feel this like kinship. I'm like, Jimmy O Yang's talking about
Yeah.
his Cantonese mom, and I'm like, I totally get it. And then I'm like, I
Yeah.
look at my mom, she's like this like white woman, who's like white as fuck, So I have like some weird identity around that. I need to work on that. Yeah,
I mean, it makes sense based on like how much time you spent, in Taiwan,
totally.
Vietnam. So yeah, in terms of, you said, okay, comedy is something that is a hobby and something that you want to always enjoy, not something you want to think of professionally ever. But for a lot of people, they have certain passions or interests. Could be music,
Yeah.
could be dancing, acting,
Right.
any arts. But they always think, okay, I never have time for this. Like, I just need to do my job.
Mm,
Like, I'll never have time for this. And they never do it. Like, they never even try.
mm.
So for you, you're obviously running two bootstrap companies at the same time, but you still have time to literally perform in front of all these people with something that is a hobby. So what would you say to them in like in a way of how can you actually find the time to spend time on these hobbies, which can be completely disparate to what your professional career is?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. I do want to say that for a lot of people, it is structurally more difficult if you have a corporate job. Like when I was working at McKinsey, there's no way I could have had like some crazy side stand-up comedy thing.
Right.
It wouldn't have worked with my job. So I totally get it when people can't, and I also get it from a financial perspective. A lot of people just don't have
Mm.
those the finances are important, and so they have to make sure that they can support themselves and their family. But in any case, with those things said, I would say like for me, the things the two unlocks for me are a creating habits around it. So for me, like this just means that I take Vietnamese class every day. I've done it for the past 5 years, Monday through Friday. I don't miss it. And just 4 to 5 p.m., I never book over it. And that's just my life. So like if you can just get a habit, for me now, those Vietnamese classes are mainly me working on my stand-up comedy, my Vietnamese teacher. But create a
Yeah.
habit, stick to it, and things compound over time. And the second is, and it's harder if you're a employee, easier if you're an entrepreneur creator, but how can you, instead of thinking about being efficient, think about your time as getting leverage. So I
Mm.
used to be obsessed with getting efficiency. Like I knew all these shortcuts. I like my words per minute is like 140. I was like typing so fast. I was like I would like blaze through my email. And now I think that I was a little short-sighted, and it would have been better if I thought about how do I achieve the most output from my input. And so that could be, for example, hiring people to, like getting assistants, a good example of that, like removing yourself from email entirely. That would have been way better than me like learning all these shortcuts. Or
Yeah.
if you're building a company, how can you create systems where you don't need yourself to be in it? And so
Mm.
I'm running these companies, but I'm also really leveraged. So I actually don't do that much work like day to day because I figured out ways to abstract myself from it. And so sometimes I think entrepreneurs, like, people think, oh, they must be so hardworking. Dude, sometimes entrepreneurs are super lazy. I know a bunch of entrepreneurs who are just like chilling out, doing like 1 or 2 hours of work a day, and they're getting like all these benefits. And then people are like, oh, they must be grinding. I was like, these guys are actually not grinding that much. Now, of course, that's like usually
Yeah.
later stage, but because they're often really highly leveraged because they just need to make a few good decisions because they built systems around themselves to abstract themselves away. And their core role now is to make good decisions. So those are the two things: leverage and consistency. I think are the two pieces.
Yeah. So for those systems, do you need to, before you start a company, do you already need to know at which stage those systems can come into place for you to take yourself away from it? Or can it be introduced when you're ready there?
Yeah, I definitely think it's dynamic. So the process for most startups is like you have an idea, you have to figure out that the idea has product market fit, You have to create product channel fit. I mean, you have to figure out how to like sell this thing. And then you need to build systems to abstract yourself away. But you can't just start off like abstracting yourself away if you don't have anything that works and no one wants to buy and no one's buying it and you haven't sold it. So you have to like, put in the work to make it happen and to get something that's valuable and that's like, working. And then you can start to abstract yourself away. So I do think people sometimes abstract themselves away too quickly. But and most entrepreneurs don't even know how to do that when you start. So I think it's totally fine to just learn that as you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, because in almost no other context do you learn how to like hire people or build systems. Like it's just a really hard thing to learn unless you're being like placed in as the CEO of a company. Yeah.
So it's kind of like whenever the opportunity or the challenge for something like that comes, you respond to it in that way. Like it's as you go.
Yeah, I think so. I just be like, focus on the idea of like, do I need to do this? If I've created a system, can I abstract myself away? Reminding yourself that I think can be useful.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Well, we're running short on time, but I have a few quick fire questions. So we'll try to just go through these. What's the earliest dream you remember having that stayed with you to this day?
Earliest dream, like literal dream or like thing I wanted to achieve?
Thing you wanted to achieve. Yeah.
Oh, okay. No, this is much better because I was like, I pooped down a slide. I was like,
a lot of directions that could have gone.
Yeah, I was like, wow. I was like, earliest wet dream. I was like, okay, well, that's what I was like. Yeah, I would say my earliest dream was to be a writer. I really loved. I was kind of doing some comedy writing in like 4th grade for my class. I thought it was so fun. I was like, I want to be an author. So that was my earliest dream.
Yeah, awesome. What's the biggest rejection you've ever overcome?
Just like infinite rejections. When I applied for jobs, I applied to 34 jobs. I got rejected from 32 of them. And then I just got these final 2 job offers at the very end. And you just don't observe all those rejections. You just observe, oh, this guy worked at McKinsey. But like, you don't see that I got rejected. Facebook, Google, like BCG, everyone else rejected me, And so that sucked at the time.
Yeah, no, but I mean, it's awesome. I always like the response, and I think it's awesome to see, as you said, like you don't focus on those rejections afterwards once you see what you've been able to achieve from it. What's the weirdest job you've ever had?
I was the like kind of a pointed white guy. It was actually the weirdest job. For a period of time in 2017, I was on the beach at McKinsey. I had no clients. And so I became the #1 Chinese speaking MC of blockchain events in the US.
Right.
So any blockchain event that was run by Chinese people, I would be the MC 100% of the time. It was amazing. It was like incredible. So that was my most specific job.
That's awesome. What's been most fulfilling being able to run 2 bootstrap companies and also have time to spend on, the comedy, which, as you said before, was actually one of your earliest dreams. So what's been most fulfilling about the lifestyle that you have today?
Yeah, for me, it's all about learning. I get to learn so much. If I'm curious about something, I just go explore it. All 3 of these are extremely learning oriented things. And so I love that I'm not just like, I do a lot of like doing mode, but most of my time I get to just explore things I want to learn. And learning for me is like so fun. So that's my favorite part.
So going into next year, what's something you haven't learned before that you want to learn next year?
So we're right now for Lumiere trying to figure out how to acquire other companies. That's something we've done a little bit of to date, but I'm not some like PE guy, so I don't really know how to do that. So I'd love to learn how to do that. Actually, I think that would be a really cool learning. By the end of next year, I've acquired like 2-3 companies, and they're like successfully kind of integrated. That would be cool. I think that'd be a great set of learnings for me.
Yeah. All right. That's awesome. Really exciting. If you had to live your life following the words of one single quote, what would it be?
I really like the Theodore Roosevelt "Man in the Arena." I don't know the exact words for it, but essentially it's just like do not essentially make fun of or like blame the man in the arena. He at least is, doing the thing. And I always like that idea of like, it's not the, It's not the critic that counts. It's the person in the arena doing the thing. And so I always think about that. Like I do, like I'm telling you, I'm shameless. Like I'm doing all this stuff. It's like so easy to look and be like, dude, this guy's like, this attention seeking, whatever, white dude in Vietnam, which is probably true. But it's so much easier to be the critic than to be the one like just doing the thing. It's so much more fun to be actually doing it. So
Yeah,
that's
I
it.
completely agree. It's like all those experiences you get, no matter what people think, it's you get to experience it and they don't. So yeah, no, I
Totally.
fully agree with that. If you could reach everyone in the world for 30 seconds, what would you say to them?
I don't know exactly what I would say, but I'd probably read something from The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. It's my favorite book. My dad gave it to me when I was 21. It's a kind of a book of wisdom. Maybe I'd write. There's one quote about friendship, which is like friendship is like
Mm.
climbing a mountain. It's only clear from the distance. So yeah, read some quote from there that I thought would be impactful, and then people would think I'm deep and reflective, and then I'd probably become like a deity, and that's my hope. That's where I'm going.
Yeah. Then the next opportunity comes from that. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Stand-up comedian, minor deity. That's where I'm going.
Oh, all right. Well, thank you so much for your time. For
Yeah,
for
thank you.
anyone who wants to get in touch with you or Lumiere or Leverage Assistance, how can they get in contact?
Yeah, best is I would say on LinkedIn actually. So just go to
Yeah.
Stephen Turban, and then they can send me a message. I check them all myself, or yeah, that's probably the easiest way to do it.
Yep. Yep. All right. Awesome. Again, yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time. Super, super fun chat and lots I got to learn as well today. So really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. You're in the arena. I love it.